This is probably one of my most important topics that have led me to want to do this, to help try and keep other people from wasting money and energy. When I first decided that I was going to invest my time and energy and money into Games Workshop products, because they started coming out with too much cool stuff for me to resist, I thought, hey, I'll save some money and I'll invest in a bunch of craft paint, which is like, supermarket / fabric store level paint. I'll just color match. I'll pull up the hobby line of paints and I'll try and match them as close as I can and take all these notes. I ended up spending about 8 hours, literally, writing down a master list of all the equivalent paint colors that I thought would be the same as the Citadel colors. I know I don't have to do that, it's just the way I wanted to do it to begin. I wanted to learn about how to paint the miniatures by the Games Workshop recommended color palette before I got off and did my own crazy color schemes. I spent about $50 on paints. I just decided to buy all the colors that I thought I might need ever for painting miniatures, and I am telling you, I have a lot of these paints. Like, there's about 20 here, and then there is a lot of these paints. And from time to time, I still am using a couple. I mentioned in another video that as we start to work on miniatures, our eyes start to learn how to see things on a miniature scale, and especially if you go from, one of the best examples is going from a craft paint metallic to a Citadel metallic. You'd have to see it to know what it looks like, but in particular when I used the Citadel metallic for the first time, I could see the paint flowing. Where with this is like gloppy and thick, and no matter how much I thinned it down, it didn't seem to make any difference. So the reason, in my experience and my opinion, of why hobby paint doesn't work as well as craft paint, I'll call this hobby paint, specifically designed for miniatures, is pigment size, is what I think primarily. It's basically, if you think about it like this, you have any given amount of space, let's say 1 by 1 zoomed in on a microscope. For a craft store paint in this much space, you may have pigment that fills up the whole space, but you only have, let's say, 4 chunks of pigment. So you've got 4 large chunks of pigment, versus with the hobby paint, same amount of space, let's say you have 100 pieces of pigment in tiny rows. You can spread that out over a much larger distance, and you basically don't have these huge gaps of clear acrylic medium in between. It feels like there's a lot less empty space within any given amount of space, and the texture will come out a lot smoother. It's sort of like coarse sand versus like fine dust is another way. Like if we were painting our miniatures with sand from the beach versus painting our miniatures with like baking soda. The other big thing I really just wish I hadn't gotten so excited about is painting miniatures is so slow, especially at the beginning. It's such a long process that I only ended up using about 2 colors a week at best when I was starting out. So rather than spending $50 all at once to get all these colors that I never even got to, because even if these were the hobby paints, I haven't even done any green, I haven't done orcs, I haven't done fire slayers or anything like that. I've only used a few colors. And so unfortunately what would happen is I'd get a new miniature, I'd go to my craft store paint and I'd start painting with it, and I would get frustrated, and then I would go and swap that one paint out with a Citadel, and even to see the difference actually took a while because my eyes weren't tuned to seeing that small yet, because my first impression was, oh, there's no difference, this is the same. But about over the course of a month I could really tell the difference. So my point being, if I was only purchasing 2 pots of paint a week for $10 a week, I would have had a lot better value. One way to go about it would be just get the paints that you need that day and work with those. That way, I think it's a lot easier for people to bite off little chunks financially than to just drop a bunch of money, especially if you just dropped a bunch of money on like the big box set for $150 or whatever. You don't want to go and spend another $150 on all the paints you're going to need, especially if it's going to take you 6 months, maybe even a year. I mean, depending on how your pacing is, how much detail you want to do, and how new you are. I'm very slow. I'm slowly getting faster, but at this point, I wish I could get my $50 back that one day spent and use it to have paid for the first 10 Citadel paints. If you're interested in investing in Citadel or even another hobby paint line, figure out what your base colors are first and work with those first, because you're going to be working with them for a while, and it's going to teach you about how it's just going to get you comfortable with working with the hobby paint. Thinking back, like my first Games Workshop purchase was Space Hulk, and it's actually still sitting here unfinished. And I started painting the Gene Stealers, and all I really needed, but I didn't realize, and this kind of comes back to being like when I first got in, I was very lost when I first started, and that's why I decided to start making these videos. All I really needed was 2 pots of paint, literally. Because all I would be doing ideally is painting their base skin color, or their carapace color, which is Cantor Blue, and their skin color, which is Nagaroth Night. These 2 paints and $10, instead of that $50 investment and that 8 hours lost, could have kept me busy for maybe a couple of weeks. Just laying down base coats. So if you've just gotten like your first box of miniatures, take a step back and look up. You know, if you're doing Games Workshop, now it's a lot easier than it was even like 2 years ago. They're getting a lot better at helping new people. Let's say it's like Shadespire. Shadespire is a great intro game. This Stormcast Eternals, it's like, okay, easy. All you need is Cantor Blue is one of their base colors, and then their Retributor armor base color, and that'll keep you busy. Oh, and if you actually, I think the perfect way to start, ideally, and if I could go back I would do this, I would get 2 base colors and 1 wash. There's nothing wrong with laying down base coats and throwing a wash on there and calling it good when you're getting started, especially if you just want to get to playing games. That's a fault of mine. I am not allowing myself to play games until my stuff is painted, and therefore I've had Space Hulk for over a year, I think, actually. At least a year, and I've never played the game still. I've kind of taken hiatus from painting it, and I started painting Shadespire stuff because it was so daunting to try and paint 50 miniatures on my first project, and then Shadespire was like, hey, you only need to paint 5 or 3 guys. So I kind of decided to start there in small batches, and it's been really good, and actually I've been getting faster and faster. And I can't wait to go back to Space Hulk and finish that up and play it, because that was the first game that really attracted me to this stuff, besides Hero Quest, actually. Hero Quest was my gateway game, and about 3 years ago I decided to paint it, and it was extremely eye-opening. Actually, I should probably just do a video on that. I would have never guessed that I would have enjoyed painting miniatures until I painted Hero Quest. And there's a lot of benefits. If you have like high anxiety, social disorders, depression, etc., PTSD, I think that this is one way that you might find some peace of mind. Also, it's a good way to invite friends. Like if you're not very social, paint up a miniatures game and, you know, paint both teams and invite friends over and play. Or Warhammer Quest is what I'm looking at next, because you 4 or 5 people, so it's an excuse to be social too. But yeah, I think I covered everything in terms of the craft paint versus Citadel. And you know, when I first started, if someone had put it to me, do you want 25 paints of, you know, for $25, or do you want 25 paints for $125? I would have to take the craft store paint, because that's what I thought the option was, but it's not, okay? it's more of, like I was saying, it's do I want to spend $15 to have a fun for a month, or do I want to spend $50 and basically slowly end up throwing all this in the garbage? I'm gonna save it, but I've replaced almost every single color here. Right now I have about like $150 in Citadel paints, and it's been well worth it because it's $150 over the period of at least a year, and I've had all that year. I've been having fun with this hobby. So, and you should too. Thanks for watching.